There's a point in your life where the things that have happened to you just become stories. I don't mean that they're less important or that they didn't happen, but they just turn into that thing that happened once. No matter how much it affected you, it's just a story, even if you're the one who survived. 5 years ago, when we were 15, my best friend Andy and I decided to go trick-or-treating one more time. I know we were probably too old, and the adults in the neighbourhood would roll their eyes when we showed up. But we figured they'd give up the candy, because kids our age were more likely to mess with their house if they didn't get free chocolate. Andy and I weren't like that at all, but it didn't make us any less likely to embrace the idea. Free candy is free candy after all. Being of that age when lazy becomes an art form in itself, Andy and I weren't just going to go out, only to find that we were getting crappy stuff like butterscotch candies, or the sort of stuff you'd see in Grandma's candy dish. Leave that for what our parents did. This is the digital age. If you know what to look for, and with even basic social media skills, you can actually get your route mapped out for you in advance. Even 4 years ago, kids were all over social media, posting pictures and putting up hashtags for where the really good candy was. We looked for hashtag full size. While it sounded like a good idea at the time, it also led to more than a few pictures of dudes naked below the waist. It wasn't a foolproof way to find the candy, but it worked at least for a little bit. We were able to find a neighbourhood not too far from Andy's house that had 4 different stops with full-sized candy bars. We each had 3 different masks. You know, the cheap thin plastic kind that gets held on your head by an even cheaper and thinner piece of elastic. They were only $1 a piece at the local dollar store, and we got more than that back in chocolate just from those few houses. Sure, by the 3rd time the parents got the clue, but what difference did it make? By the time we actually went out, only about an hour had passed until most of the houses were turning off their lights or blowing out the candles in their pumpkins. We went out a bit later than other kids because we were older, and of course, that meant we couldn't be out at the same time as the little kids. Andy was scrolling through social media, trying to see if there were any other houses close by that we could hit up, and wasn't having much luck. I was looking through what had turned out to be a pretty epic haul, when he nudged me with his elbow and held out his phone for me to see. "Hey, there's one more," he said, his voice muffled behind his white skeleton mask. I looked at the screen and saw a picture of 3 full-size candy bars on a picture with the hashtag full size. Andy scrolled his thumb across the screen and showed the address. It was about 2 miles away, which, where we lived, meant it was out in the middle of nowhere, near the edge of the woods. "Dude," I said, "that's way out there. We won't get there before they go to bed." Andy shook his head. "Nah, look." He kept scrolling his thumb to all the people who had replied to the picture. No one was going out there. Everyone was saying it was too far away, or too creepy or whatever. If they went through the trouble of getting full-sized candy bars and barely anyone showed up, they're for sure gonna wait up. I bet it's some lonely geezers who just want people to remember they're alive. I hesitated. I really didn't want to go that far out. It was cold out, and I watched as the thick clouds of breath came out from behind Andy's mask. 2 miles? I asked. Andy proceeded to goad me with some of the most off-colour insults I'd ever heard, none of which meant anything to me until he pointed out that if no one was going there, then they'd probably just give us a bunch of candy without needing to do the mask routine. Finally, I agreed. If nothing else, it would make for a good story. We could make it sound even better, maybe even live tweet it and see if people could make it go viral. We talked about doing that the entire walk there. How we could make it seem like we were in the middle of a scary movie, like we'd make them think we were actually experiencing it. Just that sort of thing to get people paying attention. Even if they were asleep, we could take some pictures or something and make it seem like a big deal. What else were we going to do? Except, we forgot most of that by the time we got there. The house was even further back in the woods than I thought. The start of the driveway seemed about half a mile from the road to the house, and there was a slight bend in it, so you really couldn't see the house beyond a light that was on in one of the windows. We didn't stop at the road or anything that dramatic. We'd been walking that far, and I think that as much as we'd excited ourselves at the idea of the social media thing, we were also just tired and just wanted to get the candy and go home to watch scary movies. As long as the driveway was, it felt like a fast walk. I didn't take my eyes off the door from the moment we could see it. There was just the one light on in the side of the house. I think it was a garage light, and it shone out the side window, so you couldn't actually see inside anything. There was a carved pumpkin with a flickering flame on the stoop, but it was really poorly done. Like a little kid or some old person tried to make it. And there was a lock on the door. I don't mean like a deadlock, but one of those little 5-button things that you see attached to doors of houses that are for sale. See, old people. They keep that on there in case they lock themselves out or something, Andy said, in a tone that didn't sound all that sure. But it sounded good enough to me, as my arm reached out to press the doorbell. The sound of the ding-dong had barely stopped when the door cracked open. Andy and I stood there, not a single word between us, as we stared at what we could only assume was a man in the doorway. He was about average height, a little overweight, but he was wearing this weird mask. It had squinting eyes and really fat cheeks, and a puckered mouth like it was trying to hold its breath. Behind the man was a single exposed red light bulb that backlit him. He just stood there, wheezing with each breath behind the mask, as it slowly turned back and forth, looking at each of us. I'm not sure which of us spoke first, but eventually we each remembered to say trick or treat. The man stood there for at least another minute, looking back and forth between Andy's skull mask and my fox mask, before turning around and walking deeper into the house. Andy and I looked at each other. Even though I couldn't see his eyes, I imagine they had the same confused and terrified look as mine. When we looked back, I could see the man pick up a box of candy bars. As he slowly turned back to the door, his arm hit a railing, and he grunted as the box flew out of his hands, the candy bars spilling out onto the ground. A few actually slid to within a foot of the door. The man grunted and cursed as he bent over to pick them up. Andy and I didn't move from where we were on the front step until the man turned around. He was on his hands and knees picking up the candy bars, and Andy nudged me, pointing at the candy that was just inside the door. I think I shook my head, but I can't remember. A moment of panic overtaking me, I just wanted to leave, so I reached inside the door to grab the candy. The man's back was still turned, and I knew I could just grab a bar and we could take off running, splitting up if we needed to. Why he'd chase us I had no idea, but we were pretty worked up by that point. It all happened in a matter of seconds. As my hand touched the smooth, cool wrapper of the candy bar, I felt a vice grip clamp down on my wrist so hard I thought it would break. The man had spun in place and grabbed me. He'd been way closer than I realised. Something about the light and my mask messed with how well I'd seen him. In one smooth motion, he tugged my arm, and I went flying into the door. But as soon as he pulled me past him, my body falling to the ground like a lump, he lunged at Andy. Something flashed in his hands. Andy had turned to run and suddenly crumpled to the ground. The man stood over him, still breathing insanely loudly, his breath a cloud in front of his face. I was trying to get up as he turned, and I saw what was in his hand. A taser. That's the last thing I remember before waking up again outside of the house. My body ached and my head was killing me. My face was cold too. I realised I wasn't wearing my mask. I looked around desperately for Andy, but I was all alone. The front door to the house was closed. The pumpkin was gone off the front step. The lights were off. I scrambled to grab my phone, but that was gone too. I was just about to start running when the panic shifted in me, and I realised that Andy might be in the house still. Yeah, he could have run away, but what if he didn't? As quietly as I could, I went around the house, trying to look into the darkened windows, but I couldn't see anything. I was too scared to knock on the door. I mean, it wasn't a prank. The son of a bitch had used a taser on Andy. When I'd almost done a complete lap, I thought I saw something moving in the dark. I cupped my eyes to the window and almost passed out from fear as the fat, round mask burst towards the window, thumping the forehead against the glass. I let out a scream, and it just stayed there, staring at me. Then it looked down at the side, next to him, and I watched as something white lifted into view. It was a skeleton mask. Andy's skeleton mask. And there was something splattered on it. Something red. I ran. I ran until my legs gave out, and I tumbled against the first house that I found that had all the lights on. I was gasping and crying and begging for them to call the police. By the time the police got out to the house, there was nothing there. No man. No Andy. All they found was the splintered door frame from where the back door had been kicked in. I hadn't even noticed that in the dark. If I had, maybe I could have done something instead of running away like a coward. I later learned the lock was on the door because the house had been foreclosed on a week prior. The social media account that Andy and I'd found was a week old as well. If we bothered to look, we would have seen that the account followed over 1,000 people and had all of 15 followers. All of the posts were reposts from other legit accounts, except for the picture of the candy bars. It was registered in the name of a kid who went to a nearby middle school, but that was just a lie to throw people off, to lure someone in. And it worked. I cried a lot. I cried as I told the strangers whose house I ran to what happened, begging them to call the cops. I cried when I told the cops and my parents what happened. I cried as I tried to understand why any of it happened, why he let me go, why he only took Andy It's been 5 years since Andy disappeared, and there's been nothing. No response. Every year, I sit on social media and I look up the hashtag full size, checking everything out, making sure it's not a lie or a lure. I've called the police more than a few times, thinking I found the guy. But mostly, I'm just looking for my friend, so I can stop telling this story and start living my life again. The life that I lost the day Andy disappeared. All for a full-size candy bar.